Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining me today. This is Kathy and I am super excited to share this card with you. This stamp set is called Sweetest Birthday Cone and it is by Colorado Craft Company. As you can see, this is one huge stamp. I started out by stamping the image onto a piece of 80-pound Nina Solar White cardstock. The panel measures 4 by 8.5. I used craft hybrid ink from My Favorite Things to stamp the image because it is Copic friendly, and of course I'll be coloring in with my Copic markers. The colors that I use will pop up on the screen for you, and they'll also pop up in the order in which I used them. I'll also make sure to list them down below in the description and over on my blog. This image was really pretty easy to color because it is so large. However, with that being said, I did weigh my markers to make sure that they were nice and full before I started coloring, just to make sure that I got some really nice blends. If you're wondering what I mean by I weighed my markers before I started coloring, basically I use a scale to see how full my markers are and whether or not they need to be re-inked. I have found that using the scale is the easiest way for me to do it. That way I don't have to guess if I've put too much ink in or if I've put too little ink in. And I'll make sure to link the scale in the description below. In addition, I'll link to an article written by Amy Schulke from Vanilla Arts Company. That's where I learned how much the markers should weigh when they're full. And it's, as I mentioned, I found it to be the easiest way for me. And with the scale only costing $9, it's totally worth it. Okay, let's move on to the actual coloring. I started out with my lightest color to map out the areas that would eventually end up being the darkest, particularly on the outer edges of the ice cream cone. Since an ice cream cone is a round object, I did want to leave a pretty good highlight down the center that would help keep the appearance that it's actually round. And as I moved on and I would get closer and closer and fill in that center highlight, I realized that I pretty much overdid it and lost my highlight altogether. So what I did was I kept trying to work it with the colors that I had already chosen to use, but I still wasn't getting quite enough of the depth that I was looking for. So eventually I end up going in with a pretty dark color, E37. And I know that it can be scary to use these really dark colors, but since I already had the ice cream cone pretty much all colored in, it was pretty easy to make sure that I didn't get too heavy-handed with it. And it really made a difference bringing in that darker color, especially on the bottom of the cone where it has that waffly texture. So after I brought in that darker color, I did go back and work it just a tiny little bit more to smooth out some of those blends. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and play some music for you to enjoy. I'll be playing music intermittently throughout the video, but I'll be back to go over a few things when I get to the actual mint chip ice cream part of the image. To color in the mint chip ice cream, I started with my darker color, which is G43, and mapped out where some of the darker areas would be. The artist had actually made it really easy because of where the lines were drawn in, where the ice cream would kind of be smushed down as it was pushed into the cone itself. And how I chose these colors, no surprise here, I had actually watched a video from Amy Schulke of Vanilla Arts Company where she colored in an ice cream cone, and one of the flavors was mint chip. Since this was the first time that I had colored this particular image, I thought, let's make it easy for myself and use the colors that she did, and it worked out really well. I'll be sure to link the video in the description below. It was really helpful for me to watch it at least a half a dozen times. She explains her technique really well in the video. After I was done adding in the shadows, I just quickly went over it with the light green. I wasn't necessarily doing any type of flicking motion. I was just literally coloring it in to fill in the rest of the space, and then went back in with the darker green just to add a little bit more shape to that one area on the ice cream. Next up was to add in my chocolate chips, which was a really easy thing to do. I literally just drew wonky square-ish types of shapes, making sure that they weren't perfectly square or perfectly rectangular, because I did want it to appear that the chocolate chips were actually tucked into the ice cream. For the whipped cream, I chose two different colors, and both of them are really light from the E family. And with the E50, all I really did was add in the shadows. Again, it was easy to do because of how the stamp is actually drawn. Then I just blended all of it out with the E000. For the cherry, I did use quite a few different reds on that, but I really wanted to make sure that I had some nice dark red on the left side, and then where it was kind of tucked into the whipped cream. For the stem, I just used one green marker and drew a line following the stamped image. This next part was really exciting for me. I know it sounds a little bit weird, but I had learned in that video from Amy Schulke that to really add in even more texture and even more depth was to use colored pencils to actually deepen the shadows and add even more texture. So I started out with a dark green pencil, and the trick is to make sure that they're very, very sharp, and also I made sure to use a really very, very light hand. And all I'm doing is accenting the areas where I had originally used the darker green marker. After I was done with the dark green pencil, I brought in a white pencil, and I'm literally just scribbling in the areas that would be the lightest. Then went in with a pale sage pencil just to add even a little bit more. then I went in with a white gel pen to add highlights to the cherry and the chocolate chips. To ground the ice cream cone, I just used my C5, C3, and C1 markers, just so my ice cream wasn't just floating in midair. And at this point, I'm already starting to think about how many different flavors of ice cream I can actually color with this one stamp. So after I had finished up this card, I actually jumped right in and colored up another one, and I did a Neapolitan ice cream cone. And once I was done with the Neapolitan ice cream cone, I started Googling images of different flavors of ice cream. I had gone to the Baskin-Robbins website, I went to the Ben & Jerry's website, and suddenly was overwhelmed with all the flavors that I wanted to color. I will have more videos using the stamp showing different ways to color different flavors of ice cream, and I'd also put a call out over on Instagram. If you don't already follow me on Instagram, there's a link in the description below over to my account there, and I had put a call out asking for suggestions on what other flavors you would like to see me color in. And you'll know it's that particular post because there's a picture of a dish of ice cream that is Cookie Monster ice cream, which I didn't even know was a thing. And yes, I have created a Cookie Monster ice cream cone, so stay tuned for that video as well. But if there is a flavor that you would like to see in particular, go ahead and leave a comment over there on Instagram, and I'll pick and choose depending on how many I get, because seriously, I actually did consider doing 31 different flavors. I know, it's crazy. Anyway, leave a comment over there. Depending on how many I get, I'll either draw from a hat or I'll just do some coloring and post the pictures. I'll record all of it, so if there is an actual video that you want to see, I can edit the video and get that up for you as well. Next, I wanted to add a background to the card, and I thought that Spun Sugar Distress Oxide ink would be perfect. So I created a mask to cover the ice cream cone, and then I just used a scrap of my masking paper to mask off the bottom of the ice cream so I didn't cover up the gray markers. I used a makeup brush for the ink blending, and I did go in with a pretty heavy hand, and I did go over it a couple of times just to make sure that I had a really good blend. Then I decided to add some spatters, but instead of using water, I used some Mr. Huey's white ink spray. I'm pretty sure that Mr. Huey's is no longer available, but there are other white sprays that you could use. You could even use acrylic paint if you wanted to. After I had splattered the white ink, I decided to add in a little bit of shimmer, so I used Perfect Pearls to do that. After I'd added the Perfect Pearls and they were dry, I did trim about 1/4 of an inch off the top so that there would be a tiny border when I actually placed it on the card front itself. Next, I stamped the sentiment, and I used chocolate brown hybrid ink for that, and I did stamp it a few times just to make sure that I got a really nice crisp impression. Next, I just adhered it flat onto my card front, and the card measures 4 1/4 by 8 1/2. After I adhered it to the front of the card, I decided to add some clear confetti. So I adhered those in place, and then I thought I would add some shine to the cherry, so I went over it with some glossy accents. And that finishes up my card for today. Thank you so much for joining me. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you've not yet subscribed, I'd love it if you would. And don't forget to ring the bell so you're notified every time a new video is posted. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.